Next, we'll start creating some basic animations. First things first, we'll create a new composition. I'm going to rename mine Basic Animation. And also choose the preset of HDTV 1080 25 again. I'll also change the duration back to 10 seconds before selecting OK to confirm those settings. Again, using the rectangle tool, I'm going to create a rectangle by clicking and dragging in the composition viewer. You'll notice that when we created this shape, a bunch of options have popped up underneath it. We'll click on the little arrow next to transform to drop down those options for this layer. Under these transformation settings, we have a bunch of options that are available to most layers in After Effects. Starting from the bottom, we have the opacity, which changes the transparency of the layer. We have the rotations, which changes its rotation. This has both a full rotation setting and a partial rotation setting. We have the scale option, which by default will have both the X and Y axes linked. You can unlink these by clicking the constraint toggle here. Next we have the position value, which is separated into X axes and Y axes. Finally, we have the anchor point for the layer. The anchor point is what all of the animations center around. In the toolbar, we have the anchor point tool, also known as the pan behind tool. We can use this to set the position of the anchor point on the layer. You can hold down the control key to snap the anchor point to certain locations on the shape. Or you can also use the keyboard shortcut to center the anchor point, which is Control Alt and Home. Now I'm going to do a basic animation of moving the rectangle from left to right and back again. We'll do this by clicking the position stopwatch. You'll notice that it has turned blue and has added a keyframe to our timeline. Next, we'll move the playhead forward to 1 second. You can also use this section here to enter a specific value. With my playhead now at 1 second, I'll select the selection tool and I'll move the rectangle over off the right hand side of the composition. You'll see as I've done this, a new keyframe has been added to our timeline. Make sure to move your playhead forward before changing a value, otherwise your new value will overwrite the last keyframe. Next, I'll move the playhead forward to 2 seconds, and I'll move the shape back onto the composition. Again, this has created a new keyframe on our timeline. We'll move the playhead back to the start and preview the animation with the spacebar. The animation isn't that exciting, but it is a start. With our playhead back at 0, I'm going to move the rectangle off the left hand side of the composition. This will update our first keyframe. With this keyframe selected, I'll copy it to the clipboard with Ctrl and C. And I'll paste it in over top of the last keyframe to update that value. A quick way to get exactly on that keyframe is to use the K key to jump forward to it. You can also use the J key to jump backwards to keyframes. With the playhead on this keyframe, I'll use the keyboard shortcut of Ctrl and V to paste the keyframe that we copied to the clipboard. I'll move my playhead back to the start of the composition again and use spacebar to preview the new animation. If you want the animation to happen slower, you can drag out the keyframe to increase the space between 2 keyframes. If you want the animation to be faster, you can drag the keyframe so that the space is smaller between the 2 keyframes. Now let's preview to see the changes made to this animation. You can also select multiple keyframes at a time by clicking in an empty space in the timeline and dragging a selection box around those keyframes. You can move the keyframe so that the animation happens later in the timeline, or with the keyframe selected, you can right click, select Keyframe Assistant, and you have a bunch of options here to change the keyframes, such as to Easy Ease keyframes, which has a keyboard shortcut of F9. The way that Easy Ease keyframes work is that there is a slow beginning and a slow ending to the animation, where it speeds up in between both of these. As I drag the playhead through the timeline, you'll notice that there's a bunch of space before the animation and after the animation where the rectangle isn't doing anything. You can trim the start or end of a layer by hovering your mouse over top of it to get the double-headed arrows and dragging in. This will make the layer not visible during these sections. When trimming the edges of a layer, if you have the Shift key held down, it will snap to your playhead. There's also keyboard shortcuts to trim the edges of a layer. Hold down Alt and press open square bracket to trim the start of a layer, and Alt and close square bracket to trim the end of a layer. Each of the transformation values underneath a layer has a keyboard shortcut to access them as well. There's A to access anchor point, P to access position, S to access scale, R to access rotation, and T to access transparency or opacity. If you have one value showing and you wish to see another as well, You can hold down the Shift key while pressing one of the shortcut keys to access another value. So for instance, if you wanted to see the scale as well as opacity, you would hold down Shift and press S to bring out the scale as well as the opacity. Each layer can have multiple keyframes set to different values. So spend some time animating some different shape layered values.